In Chapter 17, we're going to create a DNA synthesizer using Markov chains, which are a way of representing a sequence of possibilities found in a given data set. So this is a machine learning algorithm because it's going to figure out that pattern from some sort of input data. I'm going to show you how we can use Markov chains to look at a set of DNA sequences and generate novel DNA sequences that look like those. So it could be just mostly it's just kind of an interesting way to introduce some ideas to you. We can learn some more about generators. Random seeds are very important when you're working with programs that have randomness in order to be able to test them. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about what a Markov chain is and how we can use k-mers, which we've used quite a bit up to this point, to generate novel sequences between a minimum and a maximum. And all this comes from my reading of Claude Shannon's 1948 master's thesis called A Mathematical Theory of Communication. Claude Shannon is one of my heroes. He invented information theory, worked at Bell Labs with some of the greatest minds, including Richard Hamming. And he describes a Markov process, and it's a very readable paper if you want to go find it. He describes a Markov process that has a lot in common with graphs and finite state diagrams that I've been showing you before, and it's all about a transition, a set of transition probabilities, and so we're going to come up with a way of representing this. And he starts off by asking you to imagine something called a zero-order approximation for creating English words. And in the zero-order approximation, each character has an equal probability of being chosen. And that ends up creating strings like BZ and QR that with the same amount of frequency that like ST and QU might be chosen. And so we end up getting very bizarre looking selections. And I have here a little file here that's probably on your system called user shared dict words, which often is a file of several 100,000. Let's find out. I should have it on my system. Share dict words, and it's almost always in the same place. So mine has 235,976 English words. If we less that file, then we can see, there are a lot of words in here I've never heard of, Abantes and Abaris. So I would be hesitant to say that this is a really great list of English words, but there are quite a few words in here, abject, abjoint. It's a good source of text that you could use. So if we wanted to train, for instance, on this data set, we would get words that look kind of like English. But of course, if we were to choose a language with a different alphabet and with different words, then we would get words that look like those approximately. So if we look in this for patterns that do exist, here I have a little command here to show you how often we can find BZ and QR. They're almost non-existent, but we can find ST and QU with very high frequencies. So if I were to grep for, let's find out if I can find those same words, BZ, I'm curious, in user shared dict words. And we look at these, so we do find these 4 words that have BZ, which seems like an unlikely combination. So Shannon goes on to describe a first-order approximation obtained by choosing successive letters independently of each other but having the same probability as in natural language. So if we were to go through this text of just straight up English words that haven't been duplicated, then we could count all the individual letters and then divide them by how many letters are in their total, and we would be able to find out that we would have one measure of the frequency that we see letters in the alphabet. And so, for instance, Shannon found that the letter E has a probability of 0.12. And that W is much less frequently used and has a probability of 0.02. So if we look at this with the state diagrams that I've been so partial to in the book, from some given state, if we only had, if we were only considering how we would move to a new state, we could go to E with a probability of 0.12, and we could go to W with a probability of 0.02, and then we would find all the probabilities of all the other letters in here and include those. And I was playing with this before I started up the video, that I can go into a REPL and give you an idea. If I import random, and then I can also import something called the string module. And if we do help on string, one of the things that's nice is that, for instance, it has in here the ASCII letters, which includes upper and lowercase letters, and then we have something in here called ASCII lowercase, ASCII uppercase, letters, hex digits, all that. So very useful. So I can say, for instance, a random choice from string ASCII letters, and that would give me just a random letter from the alphabet. And I could, we've seen this before, I could do I could do this for some number in a range of, say, 10, and that would give me let's see, for range, for that in range, sorry. So that would give me a bunch of upper and lowercase letters mixed in, and if I were to want to do that, I could, if I were to want to create something like a new word, I could join those on the empty string. And so I get these just random gibberish words. I could even take it further by choosing some random int here. Let me make my screen just a little bigger. Let's see if I can get this, random.rand int in the range of, say, 3 to 8. And then I would get, let's join those back together. And I'm getting these this would be basically a zero, Claude Shannon's zero order. I'm just randomly choosing a bunch of letters from the alphabet, and I'm getting some very strange looking strings that have no relation whatsoever to English text. Whereas if I were to create a model that at least had some sort of probability to it, I would at least get letters in, they might not be in any particular order, but I would get groupings of letters that would be more likely to be seen in English text. So that's the second order. So moving on to the second order approximation, he says where subsequent letters are chosen with the frequencies with which the various letters follow the first one. So he's starting to look at patterns of text, and we have called these little bits of text, we call them k-mers. But a lot of this research that we have benefited from in biology has come from linguistics, where the same idea is called n-grams, n for some number, and gram for writing. And so, for instance, I say, what possible 3-mers could be created giving the 2-mer th? So if we were to look in English text at all the words that start with th, or that have a th, they don't have to start with th, but we find all the words that have th in them, and then we look at what is the letter that comes after th, and then we would find, I don't believe that we would ever find thz's, and let's go find out. So if we look for if we were to search for thz, we're not going to find that. So if we were actually training on user-shared dict words, we would never find th followed by a z. But if we would find th followed by an r, we're going to find that many times. In fact, how many times are we going to find that? Well, let's count that. We're going to find it 1,260 times. How many times do we find th followed by e? Well, we find it 3,481 times. And so we have to, if we were to really train on this, we'd have to take into account that sometimes th could be followed it could be in a word more than once. In here, I'm showing that. So I have a bunch of, I have an even better way of searching through here for the frequencies of THR. Using this command, I came up with 1270, which is 10 more than I found here. And for this, for THE, looking for repeated applications, I found 3593. So with that, if we were to divide, do a little bit of math, then we come up with this model that says if we are at a TH, we have the probability of moving to an R with this number, and it's 3 times as more likely that we would move to an E, which I think really tracks with how, for an English speaker, with what you would probably find in English text. So we're getting into like, how can we model this in Python? And I want to take this idea into how can we use these ideas to generate novel DNA sequences. And why did I want to do this? Well, I guess I was just really interested in Markov chains and how to come up with something like this. But also I was thinking about testing, maybe creating decoy sequences for some sort of testing. Like you're trying to find, you have some data that has something that you're looking for, gene regions or something like that, and you want to generate sequences that don't have that, but still maybe exercise your program in a particular way, and you want to ensure that you're not finding that. So I came up with this idea, well, what if we used Markov chains? So with, and it's very important to think about that, how, another reason to talk about this is just a general understanding of machine learning. So for instance, what you train this on is going to have a huge effect of what comes out the other end. So I note here, English words and spellings have changed over time. So if you were to train something like on Beowulf or Canterbury Tales, where the English was written in a very, very different way, and they used different dialect and different words and different spellings, you're going to come up with text that's very different from modern newspapers. And so that's what is the learning part of machine learning. And that's an important part of just basically all the machine learning algorithms that we talk about today. It's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have good training data, you're not going to get anything useful out of this. And so I point out that in the same way, if we were to train our algorithm here on the human genome, it's going to produce different results than a viral metagenome from under the ocean. So in reviewing this for making the video, I read through this and I realized that, I was following the same pattern as other previous chapters, where I'm like, okay, let me set this up for you and let's have you try to write it on your own. And I realized the extent to which it's incredibly unlikely that you would really be able to come up with the same solution that I did that passes all the tests. So I think that for this video, we're just going to step through how I did this. We'll use some of the ideas that I present in the challenges to just talk about how I came up with the solution. But more than anything, I think it's maybe just worth it to code along with me and try to get an understanding of Markov chains. So we're going to start off here. If you haven't already, you should go into the top level and source VNV bin activate. And I pretty much always do that in at least 2 windows. And then I'm going to go into the 17 synth directory. And with that, I'm going to copy solution to, let's see, what do I call it in this one? Synth.py. Synth.py, and let's run synth with -h. And you see, like the previous exercise, this one has quite a few arguments, but really, it's just a lot of them, and you should know how to make all these by now. For instance, we want one or more in positional input files that will be the training files. Then we're going to have an optional output file name. It's going to default to out.fa. We're going to be creating a FASTA file of sequences. By default, it's going to be FASTA, and if we wanted to, we can change that to FASTQ. And then let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the input file format. We can read FASTA and FASTQ. We're only going to output FASTA. how many sequences, it's going to default to 100. The max length is going to be 75. The minimum length is 50. These are quite short sequences. And then the Kamer size that we're going to be using, 10, which is also really on the low side. For better fidelity, we might use something closer to 20 or 30. And then finally a seed, and this is perhaps the most important thing that we're going to talk about here. And it's a pretty straightforward idea, but when you're working with a program that has randomness, how do you make the randomness repeatable? So we already have in here, let's just look at how I created this. The class args becomes quite a bit bigger and fairly complex. And the thing that I would really note here about this is that what I tend to do is whenever I need access to any part of this structure in some function, I will often just send the whole argument structure over, because it's often I'll need one or two items out of here. And sometimes I pull one thing out. But by having all of this in a structure and having it typed, then I get the benefit of a lot of type checking from like TY. And in the old days, MyPy, when that worked. There's not a lot to say here about the get args. It's exactly what you've seen before, and it's just a little bit longer. We have lots of options, and they all have reasonable defaults, so we're not forced to put a lot of input here in order to get this to run. One crucial thing here is the way that I define the seed, and I have some information here. Let's see, yeah. Understanding random seeds. So let's just talk about this for a second. Oh, one other thing to talk about. I have an optional argument, which I've not used before, and that is right here. I'm defining seed as optional, which means I need to bring in from the typing module this optional. That is the same as a union of the int or the none type. So it means that if there is something there, it should be an int. If there's not, it's going to be none. And so the way that I define this, even though I didn't really need to say the default is none, that is the default type for any optional argument in argparse. But what I'm saying here is that the type is int. So when the user provides it a value, it needs to be an int. But if they don't provide it, it's just going to be none. And it's important that it's none and that it's not 0, because 0 is an int, and that is a valid seed that I could use. Any integer value is. And so I just want to make sure that I'm very explicit here that when it's not provided, I do want none to be the default seed, which is basically having no seed at all. That's exactly what that means. And so when there is a seed, it's going to affect how the randomness works. When there's not a seed at all, then it's going to be pseudo-random. So let's just talk a little bit about random seeds. If I and I was showing here that this will be the same as what I was showing in the REPL earlier. Let's just go into here and I'll say my bases are AC, G, and T. And if I import random and then just make a random choice, import random, and I make a random choice from bases, I'm just going to get, over and over again, I'll just get random bases. And if I were to do the same kind of thing where I join these, a random choice for bases for some number in range, 20, then I would get some random string of DNA. And every single time it looks like, just anything at all. And this is probably just garbage. There's probably unlikely that I would ever generate something that, for instance, has something that looks like a gene from Drosophila. But if I were to go train on some Drosophila data, I might come up with, especially if I were choosing longer Kamer regions of like, say, 30, I might actually come up with things that look a little bit like genes. And therefore, if I was looking for genes in Drosophila, I could use those as decoy sequences. So I show that here. I can create these random strings, hard-coded to 10, or just randomly choosing some number between 10 and 20. And every time I do this, and every time you do this following along, you're just going to get a random different string. But if I were to set the seed to be, for instance, 1, from this point forward, if you do the same thing, then you and I should both get, for instance, if we both run this, we both should get the same answer. And so that is how random seeds work. That underneath, it's not truly random. There's a random number generator that's going on that's only pseudo-random. In fact, there's a hilariously titled book, Kovoy, I can't remember his name is, but it says the generation of random numbers is far too important to be left to chance. And that seems like a tongue-in-cheek thing to say, but it's actually true. There used to be enormous, giant books for computer scientists of random numbers to use because they're so important in computer science. And so they had to come up with reliable ways to create random numbers that seem to be random, but they're only pseudo-random. And so that means that from a starting point, if we always start from some base seed, we will always get the same choices after that. The random seed in Python here in the random module does not have to be a string. It says here it can be supported seed types are none, which is basically it's not there, int, which I'm using, float, string, bytes, or byte array. So I just happen to decide I want to use an int, but you can use whatever you want. For instance, I could choose the random seed of Markov, who was, if I recall correctly, a Russian mathematician who came up with these ideas that Claude Shannon was talking about. So, but the idea here is that if you put in random seed 1 and then execute this code, you should get this same string. And then if you do the with Markov and then execute this line, it will choose the same random integer, it will choose the same random choices of bases, and we will both be able to get the same string. And let's see, let's just compare here from when I wrote the book to when I just executed this now several years later on a different system using a different Python. AGAT, that looks right, GAG, blah, 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 CCGG. Looks like I'm getting the exact same answer. So that's the cool thing about random seeds. And if you don't learn anything else from this chapter, that's probably good. So I have just a couple notes here that remembering that the integer 4 is different from the string 4, and so it doesn't matter what you use, just make sure that you're doing it the same way. And so I decided I was going to force my user to give integers, and so I'm using argparse to validate that. And the way that so the deal here is that it's going to be a global change to your program. And so I'm pointing out here that whenever I use random seeds, my programs always look the same. There's a def main where I start. The first thing I do is I get the arguments. I like to use getargs because it hides a bunch of complexity. Often dozens of lines of code are hidden away there. And as soon as I get my args and I validated the input to my program, I immediately call random seed and I set the seed so that it will not affect anything else, or it will affect everything else after that point in the file. Okay, so if you're still staying with me here, I'm going to talk about how to read in the training files, and I have already used argparse to validate that. For instance, the input files are going to be a list of text.io, and I've used the argparse file type. I continue to use this even though it's been deprecated because that's how I wrote the book several years ago. So I know that these are going to be valid input files, and if you choose not to use file type, then you're going to have to, it's not a big deal. You're just going to be opening the files yourself and validating that they're okay. So I want to open these, and I'm assuming that they're going to be sequence files that are either in FASTA or FASTQ format, and I have limited this here to FASTA and FASTQ, and I'm assuming that they're going to be FASTA format. And I could even go back and bring in the guess format that we used before so that the user doesn't have to do that. And so not going to worry about that if you want to add that. You can. And so how am I going to read these and use the information in them? So the first thing that I decided I would come up with is this dictionary that goes from some string to some float. That's going to be the weight. It's going to be that transition state that we looked at earlier if we go back to this. So given some string, what are the possibilities of it going to well, really, given this string here, are what is the probability that we can. So how can we represent that transition? So I decided in talking about types and stuff, I thought it might be an interesting idea to show you that you can actually create new types in your code. You're not limited here to always just using these types here that you can import from typing and such. So I decided to create a type to describe a dictionary that goes from a string to a floating point value, and I'm calling that a weighted choice. And you're going to see here I also decided to create another type that I call a chain, which is a dictionary that has a string as its keys and a weighted choice as its value. And so if I were to try to stick all this into one type, and if I were to use something like a weighted choice is a dict from a string to a float, and if I wanted to use this type signature everywhere I wanted to use that, that would just be very difficult for me to wrap my head around what I'm looking at. And so by using these aliases here, I'm able to properly describe the data that's in these structures for type checking, but I'm also able to just generally give myself an idea of what this dictionary of a string to a float is supposed to be. Oh, that's a weighted choice. So that's going to be important for some of the random modules I'm going to be choosing. So what does this weighted choice mean? Well, if I have, this is the only input sequence that I'm using for my program, I could look at all of the three-mers, and I look here and I see that there's a three-mer here at the beginning, A, C, G. And so I could say, what comes after ACG? Well, I see ACG is followed by a T, and then I see ACG is followed by a C. And if I were only looking at this one sequence, I could say, well, when I have ACG, I have some choices here, that it can either be followed by a T or a C. And because there's only two instances of this, and I saw two different values, each one has an equal weight. I could choose them basically coin flip. And so if I want to further to take this into this chain here, I could say, so ACG has a possibility of emitting as its next letter either a T or a C with equal weight. And so this is the data structure that I'm trying to build up. And this data structure will be learned from the input files. So I have this idea, and we're just going to be going through and looking at how I did the read training. So let's look at that. So the first thing I do here, and I talked about this earlier, is I get args, and then I immediately set random seed to whatever is the args.seed value. And it's important to remember that if it's if the args.seed is none, then this is essentially like not even calling this. If you have called random seed before, and I'm going to show you a little bit in the testing code, you can actually save the state before you set the seed and then restore the state to that. If you have set the seed and you want to knock it out, you can just random seed set it to none. So this is like I never actually, if it's none, then this has no effect on the program. So I'm going to get back these chains. Perhaps I'm going to get back. The read training is going to take the files, it's going to take the format, and it's going to take the size of K, and it's going to read the training files and try to. So how does read training work in? Well, it's going to take these file handles, the file format, the K, and it's going to emit a chain. And if we have to remember, a chain is going to look like it is a dictionary that goes from some string, like this ACG, to some weighted choice, which is another dictionary that goes from a string, like the next base that could be followed, that's just the key, and then the value is going to be some floating point value, which is the frequency. It's going to be the weight for choosing that, and that weight is going to be decided by looking at the input training. So I start off by initializing this dict, which is going to be that dict from a string to a string to int, and it's going to be a default dict using a counter, which is not something that we've seen before. We've talked about default dict before, and we've only put in things like int and list there, but we could actually use a counter from the collections that we've used several times before. So that's a really cool thing, and I didn't actually know I could do that until I wrote this code. And I go through for each of the input file handles. I go through each one of the records by parsing that file handle in the given file format. So all of this you've seen before. And I go through each one of the k-mers that we've seen. We've definitely used this several times. We're coercing the sequence record, the sequence object in the record, into a string, and we're using find k-mers, which is exactly what we've seen before from previous exercises. And we're saying for some value of k, like formers, we're going to set for counts, and this is a little, let's say we have, let's just say we're going to have this string. Let's join this. Yep, and we're going to say DNA is equal to that. So we have some DNA, and we're going to say from synth import find k-mers. And so we can say the k-mers in, and I'm going to have to remember how to run find k-mers. So given a sequence, we're going to say find k-mers in DNA, and we want all the formers. So we have these k-mers like that, and let's take the first one. K-mer is equal to k-mers at 0, and it looks like this. So in this data set, if we're dealing with formers, then what we actually want to do is look at the first 3 characters of this and say, what is the last character? So if we're trying to train on formers, we extract all the formers, and then we say, how can a former be extended? What would be the next letter that would come after C, G, G, G? Is it going to be another G? It seems like it would be likely that it would be something other than a G, right? So in order to do that, let's go jump back here to retraining. I'm going to say, go into counts, and using as the key, the k-mer up to k minus 1. So let's say k here is equal to 4, and we have this k-mer, and what I want here is k-mer up to k minus 1. So that gives me the first 3 characters. So for whatever value of k, so when k is 32, it will take the first 31 bases of that k-mer. And I want to say, and then the last character is k-mer minus 1. And so what I'm saying is, in the counts for the key that is the first 3 characters, at this other key that is the last character, add 1 to that. So let me go here, and I'm going to create default dict. I'm going to have to say from collections import counter and default dict. And so now I can say counts is equal to this, and I can say, let's look at what happens when I do this, and let's look at counts now. And we see here that it has indeed taken CGGG, peeled off the first 3 characters, and set as its value a counter that has G1. So CGG, so far we've learned that it can be followed by a G one time, and we've seen that. So in order to determine the frequency, we have to do all of the counting through all of the input files. Then we have to go back and divide the frequency by the total number of times we saw something. So that's what's going on in the weighting here. And then what we're going to end up returning is this data structure that is, for a given k-mer, create the weight for those frequencies that we saw. So let's just take this one one by one. So after we've gone through for all of the k-mers, so for k-mer in k-mers that we have, actually, let me do this. I'm going to reset my counts to this. I'm going to say for Kamer in Kamers. And let's look at what we get when we set this. And then let's look at counts again. If I know that, let's see, from pprint, import pprint, and I think if I pprint a dict of counts, I can get something pretty. Okay, not too bad. So for all of the Kamers that and reminding yourself, what if I pprint the Kamers, what this looks like. So for all of these Kamers, take the first 3 characters and tell me what is the frequency with which letters come after that. And you see, it's pretty uninteresting. We only see one instance where AAG can be followed either by an A or a T. So we're not going to get anything interesting out of this data set because it's so small, which points to a lot of these machine learning techniques that you generally need quite very large input data sets to do anything interesting with them. So we've created this data structure now, and we want to go through and turn these into weights. So what's going on here is that we're going to go over count.item. So that looks like let me just show you what that looks like. I can if I were to let's see, for Kamer, well, in items, I can print Kamer and freaks for frequencies. And so it's just printing this and then this data structure that we're seeing. So that's what's going on with count.items. And what I want to do is turn it into, from this counter into something that is this weight. And so I can actually bring in, let me do a couple of tricks here. I'm going to copy paste that. I'm going to move it all the way flush left. I'm going to get rid of my typing for the moment because I haven't imported those typings, those type hints here. And I'm going to create this def weight here. And so now with that, I can, in my REPL here, play with this idea. So instead of returning Kamer and freaks, I want to turn the frequencies into a weight. And so what does that look like? Well, if I were to take, for instance, this bit here, the only interesting one that we have, and I were to say weight on that, it's going to turn that into A can be followed by A can be found half the time and T can be found half the time. So let's make it a little more interesting. Let's say that G can be found 3 times. And now we see here that the weights have changed a lot. A has dropped to 0.2, T has dropped to 0.2, but G is 3 times more likely, which is exactly what we saw here when we ran this. So this makes a lot of sense. Let me just show you that here, make sure it doesn't get cut off. So I'm turning this data structure, called counts, into this other data structure, which is going to look like this. Let's call this freaks. It's going to be equal to transforming that into the frequencies, and let's look at freaks. And it's a little hard to see. So let's try p-printing that frequencies. And this is something that we can now use. So it's been changed from a number of times that we found it into the frequency of times that we found it. And that again, to stress, the first thing that we had to do was read the entire data set into memory. So this, if you're using, lots of genomes, whole genomes, and mammalian genome or plant genomes, for that would be really scary. So, several copies of the wheat genome. If you're reading that, you have to read all of that into memory and have these data structures and then transform them into these weighted data structures. So you're going to need quite a bit of memory under certain circumstances in order to get this training data. But now we have this really interesting data structure that lets us come up with ways of intelligently creating and extending these Kamers into the next Kamer. So that's what is going on, and it is conceivable that for instance, we pass in a bunch of empty files, and so we get nothing from any of this, and we actually end up returning an empty dictionary. And that's possible. A chain is just a dictionary, and so that's what's going on here if it's possible that by reading the training data that I get this chain structure, then I'm going to go in here. And if I don't, then I'm going to call sysexit. And I'm using sysexit because I want to print this error message. And for instance, so if I was using a very large K-mer size of, say, 30, and all my input sequences were 10 base pair long, I would get nothing out of this, right? So I'm able to say that there are no args.k size mers in the input sequences. So, and that needs to be an error. I've decided that that's going to print this error message and return with a non-zero exit value. So there are a couple instances of why I would not be able to get any chains. If I do get some chains, then I want to generate some sequences. And so let's look at this next function, genseq. What is going to be going on here? Let's see if there's anything else. Okay. Before we move on, let's just talk a little bit about how I went about testing this. So you've already seen find K-mers. You already know how to test find K-mers. And I point out here there is in my tests, let's see, I have a unit test function here. Let's write this, and I can jump over here. So I have, for instance, a way of coming up with a way of reading, of testing the read training. And because read training wants to work on a file handle, and I'm trying to write a unit test that doesn't need access to some file, I want this to be able to live completely independently of any file system. I'm using this trick here that I showed before of using IO, string IO, to create a fake file handle. Now, earlier when I did this, I needed access to some the name that went along with this for the output that I was creating. And so I ended up using that from unit test, a mock open, very useful, but I don't need to use that in this instance because I don't need that. I just want to be able to pass in something that behaves a little bit like a file handle, and I can do that with string IO. So I'm creating this string. It's a FASTA format. It starts with a greater than sign. It has a dummy ID here. I've got a very simple string, the same string I was using before, ACGT, ACGC. And I'm going to read in this. I'm passing this in as a list of file handles. It's a list of just one fake file handle. And I'm saying this is in FASTA format. Return all the formers in here. And this is the data structure that I expect to get back for this input data for this K-mer size. And a key part of what, this is exactly what we're looking at here. And I'm trying to show you, this is this other string, but I'm trying to show you this, visually show you the data structure that we're trying to create by all that code. This is another way of documenting that and being able to remind yourself or to teach someone else who's reading your code, what does read training do? Well, given this input data, create this data structure, which says, okay, we're looking at formers. So given a former, how would I create a new former? Well, I would look at the last 3 letters of it. And this, think about the overlap graphs that we created. How would I extend this in this data structure into a former? Well, if I see ACG, I would never choose another G after that. Because that's not what I saw in my input data. I would choose either a T or a C with equal weight. And here I'm passing in the same string, but now it's in FASTQ format. And so I added, after the sequence, I added the plus sign, and then a new line, and then a number of exclamation points, just some sort of ASCII values of equal length to the sequence that we have here. And then I say, read this F2 as FASTQ format, and I'm getting back this other data structure. So I'm verifying that this works, and it's the same string, but I'm also changing the K-mer size to 5. So I'm getting back a different data structure. So I'm both exercising how I'm testing the format and also the K-mer size. And so for a 4mer, I'm actually expecting the keys to be 3mers. For a 5mer, I'm expecting the keys to be 4mers, and so on. So that is how I went about testing that. Important to think about when you're writing this kind of code. Not only is it useful to verify that your program is correct, but it's really good documentation. And I have here that in the directory there's a Kamer Tyler, just trying to help you think about how these Kamers can be extended. And by lining them up here, you see that we can learn from our data that when if I have CGT, what could follow after it? Well, I can see here in the next one that it could be followed by A. And so I would go through all my sequences and figure out ACG could be followed by T, ACG could be followed by C, and so forth. So given that, I have a bunch more stuff, and I've already explained all this. This is what we're trying to do. So now I'm going to move on to generate the sequence. And so I have this, I had high hopes that if I were to give you this function signature that you go off and write it. And years later here I come back and I read it and I think, that's really too complicated. You're unlikely to be able to come up with this. So that's why we're just going to talk about this. So, but let's talk about it from the idea of starting with a test. So, given some chain that looks like this, so we've now broken this down into we read the training data. So now we have this frequency table that looks like, say, like this. What I want to do is generate some sequence from that chain using these formers, a number between 6 and 12. And when I call genseek, after I've set a random seed of 1, it's going to create this string. Now, what I had to do when I was writing this was first write genseek, figure out the string that it would return when I created this random seed, when I set this random seed, and then I wrote the test to verify going forward that my program still continued to create the same seed. And that's part of what, when I came back and read this, I was thinking, you'd have to make all the exact same choices in the exact same order that I did in order for yours to work, and it'd be better for us just to step through this. But one thing here, and I said I would talk about this, when I go through my testing, it's going to change the state of the program. Because when I set random seed, it's going to be a global change to every place that uses random. And so something I can do here, excuse me, is save the state of the current state of the program using random get state. I can then change the state of the program, Again, I'm calling genseek under two different conditions. With this random seed, I expect this sequence, and with 2, I expect this different one. And after I've verified that both of those work, I'm going to return the state. I'm going to set state back to what it was before. And so how do I go about? So I have all these ideas for how I was going to try to lead you to the answer, but I think it's going to be easier if we just simply go look at how I did this. And so let's just go back to my solution here, and you can read through those suggestions if you want to try to do it yourself. I've already gone through how we read the training set. We already understand how to find Kamers, and so how do we generate a sequence given a chain and some K that we're using, and some range of min and max? How do we generate that sequence? So the first thing is that we have this chain, and I've called it, let's call it chain here. Chain is equal to freaks, which is what I should have called it. And we have this chain of going from some K value to some other state. I'm creating this seek, some sort of seek by randomly selecting one of them. So this is going to be randomly, I chose one of these possible starting points, which is an important way to start, right? Like we're not going to randomly generate three base pair, because we're not guaranteed to find that in our training set, and we wouldn't know how to complete it. We can only complete a Kamer that we've seen before. So if we start from something that was in our training set, we know that we're going to be able to extend this. So I'm randomly choosing one of the keys from my chain. I'm going to randomly select my integer, my sequence length. And that's going to be from random int, and let's just say it's going to be between 5 and 10. So seek ling, what did we get? it's going to be 7. So we're going to try to extend this to be 7 base pairs long. So as long as the sequence, the length of the sequence that we have is less than the sequence length that we chose, and this is going to generate one string. We're going to look at the previous bits by looking at the sequence, and we're going to say -1 times k minus 1. So we're looking at, let's see what that looks like. If and we're going to say k is equal to, I think I'm going to use 4. Maybe let's say 4. Let's see what I've got here. And what is previous set is AAG. So we're looking at the entire sequence right now. And we're going to say, if it's possible to get that previous state, we're going to get some choices. So let's set that. Oh, I need to copy. And let's make let's see. Sorry, I'm using the walrus operator here, and I just need to say choices. So I said choices is equal to get previous, and let's see what choices looks like. So I was able to say, my transition state is either an A or a T with equal choice. So I was able to get something for the previous threemer here, for the previous value. And so I'm going to say, okay, so let's use random choices, which we haven't seen before. So let's do help on random choices. Help on random.choices, which is different from choice in that it has a population that we can select from, but it also additionally has weights, which is exactly why I came up with this whole weighted structure here. That's going to be very important, and we're going to tell it how many to choose. We actually want only one, but choices is set up to always return a list. So how do I copy? How do I choose from that? So it's going to look like this: random choices, where the population is, and let's look at real quick. What is the population? It's going to be choices.keys. I can either choose an A or a C, and my weights is going to be the values. And so if I look at that, my weights are going to be 5 and 5, and they are in the same order. So given what's a random choice that selects from, I don't want that. I want to just look at this part. It's going to choose a T. And you see here, I told it k of 1, so it's always going to choose 1 value. Let me try that again. If we were to do that again, then it's choosing a T, it's choosing a T, and it's always, it seems to always be coming up with a T. But you see here, it's choosing, if I were to say k of 2, then it would choose A and T. Even though I'm saying I want a return value of 1, so the k here is how many to return, I'm always getting back a list, which is why I'm then subscripting to sub-0. So I didn't just take the first bit there. So I'm extending the sequence by randomly choosing the next base using the weights that I figured out, and I only want 1. And so I keep doing that until the sequence has gotten up to the sequence length. And this is a little test here. There could be things that break along the way, like if, for instance, I happen to go down some sort of a path where I'm not actually able to come up with the next choice, then I'm going to break out of this. And it could be the case that the sequence that I found, that I generated, is less than the minimum length that I selected here. And in the case where that happens, I'm just going to return the none value. I could have returned an empty string, but I'm basically returning something that should just be thrown away, which is why the type signature of this function is an optional string. So that's how I generate a sequence, one sequence. So given a chain, I go through, figure out all the different choices for that could happen for each one of the next letters. And so if I were to then, let's just run this little bit here, and we look here, seek is equal to this, now seek is equal to this. It has grown. And so if I were to run that again, seek has grown again. And if I run it again, seek has grown again. So I'm just extending this sequence using the choices that I keep seeing. And you see here it chose an A, then it chose a T, then it chose another T. What do we get if we choose it one more time? Chose another T. So it's a very uninteresting data set, so we're going to get a very uninteresting answer. out of this. But that is how I generate an individual sequence. So how do I use that? Well, this is interesting. If you look here, this looks a lot like a list comprehension. I'm calling genseek for some range in count here. And we'll talk about this count here in a second. But normally you would see square brackets around that. But what I'm actually doing is by using parentheses, I'm creating what's called a generator. And so that is, we've seen generators, we've seen these iterators. I can keep calling next on them to produce values from them, or I can use them in a list content in a for loop, and it will generate sequences until it generates this exception of there's no next value, and a for loop will then drop out of that. And so what's going on here? I'm using enumerate then. To keep pulling, so I'm using this for loop to keep pulling values out of sequences. And because sometimes genseek may return something that is like the none value or the empty string, I'm using filter none, which we saw before is a way of removing things that look like, let's say we have some seeks that looks like AAC and then none, and then GGT. And if I filter on the none on my seeks, I'm going to have to put that into a list context. It is a way of removing the values that look like something that's falsy. I'll show you with an empty string there. Both the none and the empty string will be removed when I use a filter of none. So what's going on is I'm coercing seeks in a list context, generating each one of the sequences, getting rid of the things that I'm throwing away the sequences I was not able to generate, and I'm calling enumerate. And this is something here, I really wish I had introduced this earlier, but when I enumerate over some values, I can actually start counting at a different place from 0. So we've already seen if I wanted to enumerate over this list, now I have to call list, don't I? We see here that it starts counting at 0 and then 1 because I need some value to put here for I. I, again, terrible variable name, except in this context of iterating over some sort of enumeration. So I need some number here to put for my sequence ID. It needs to be a unique value in my output FASTA file. So I'm just going to number them. I could just as easily start counting at 0. It doesn't matter. But what's cool is after enumerate, now I've got to figure out where this belongs. I think I go right here. I can say start equal to 1. And so I'm just telling it to start counting at 1. I could just as easily told it to start counting at 100, and it would start at 100 and then 1. Something to note here too is that you can actually just put 1 there. You don't have to say start equals. I often do that in single throwaway scripts that I'm writing hurriedly, but this is far more documenting, self-documenting. So I would generally put this into production code. So there's a lot going on here. I'm calling this to generate a bunch of sequences, a generator that will generate sequences, and then I'm iterating over them. I'm deleting all the ones that I don't need. I'm enumerating them starting at 1, and now I can just simply print the sequence that I just joined in FASTA format to the output file. So a lot going on here. But, hopefully at this point, if you watched all the previous videos, if you're reading my book, then all of these things you've seen before and you understand, the point here of doing this, if I had done this with square brackets and it was a list comprehension, the program would have to stop right here and generate all of those sequences before it went to the next line. By using a generator, it's a lazily evaluated function, and so the sequences will only be generated up until the point where I don't need them any longer. So if I've hit the number of sequences that I want, I've got this condition here to break out of my loop, I will only generate the number of sequences that I needed for the program. And so that is a way of saving execution time and memory consumption and all of that. And finally, when I'm done, I'm going to give a nice error message, to the user to say I'm done. I pretty much always put at the end of my script done, so that I know I made it to the bottom of the script. And I usually have, if I'm writing something to an output directory, an output file, I'll say, oh, by the way, here's where you're going to find the output, which is very useful to me. I often like, okay, what did you do? Or where can I find the results? So there's a lot going on here, and I have a lot if you want to read over this, and I have some more to say about that. I think is there a test here for, yes, for genseek. So I show here, given this chain, I have all of this. We looked at this before. Now that you've read through the code, hopefully you understand that when you call genseek, given this chain of formers, and between 6 and 12, that it will always produce, with this seed, it will always produce this sequence. So I'm able, and again, I had to write the code and then go, probably in a REPL, I pulled it up, I set the random seed, I called it, and it produced that sequence. So then I put that into my test, and going forward, it's a way of verifying that my code will continue to work in the way that I wrote it. So this is another example of a regression test. So I have some ideas here. I'm pointing out, this is I'm stressing here that if I had used a list comprehension, then it will generate all of the sequences for me. Whereas if I use a generator with the exact same code, but putting it in parentheses, now I've created this class of a generator, which is this iterator. It's this thing that we've seen before. And so this will only produce the sequences that I actually need. And here's I'm showing you what I showed you before about how to use filter none to get rid of those. So if I run this now, let's try running this on my inputs, and let's look at the inputs, ls test inputs. I've got I don't want to, I think, do star. I probably want to run so synth on test input star.fa is probably what I want. It's running through this, and I can then use seek magique from our previous program to let's run that. Do I have seek magique? Have I still got a copy around? And I'm going to look at out.fa, and it shows here that it did create minimum and 75 and min, and between 50 and 75, which were the defaults. The average for this run was 63.59, which is very close to the number there, and it produced 100 sequences, and we see that. And let's look at what the output looks like. So these are numbered here, as we can see, and these are just random output of strings. And so let's run this again, and writing it to, you know what, I don't remember my help. So yep, writing to, let's run it again, and this time let's route it to out2.fa. Let's let that run, and if we do a diff on out and out2, we should see a lot of differences, right? So let's get rid of out.fa and out2.fa, and let's run those again. So we'll do out1, and we'll use a seed of 1, and then we'll do out2 using the same seed of 1, and then we'll do diff again of out1 and out2, and we see no differences. So using the same input seed, we're able to produce 100 sequences that are exactly like the previous run, and it's because we started from the same starting point. So all the random choices that were made, all the calls to random in our program follow the same path, and that's really very interesting. So again, if you take nothing else from this chapter, maybe you've learned a little bit about working with randomness and testing it. So going further, what if you made it so it can handle both DNA and RNA? So, maybe you input DNA, but you want to output RNA. So, that's pretty easy. Just change all the T's to U's, right? Expand the program to handle paired-end sequences. So forward and reverse reads are in two separate files. You could put them together. That's kind of interesting. If you are interested in Markov chains, there's a very important tool in bioinformatics called Hammer that uses hidden Markov models, profile hidden Markov models, to find homologs in sequence databases. So you'll find Markov chains all over the place in biology and in machine learning. So if you have a basic understanding of this, then hopefully it helps you to understand how your agentic coding agent helps you. So key points here: random seeds are important for replicating pseudo-random selections. Markov chains encode the possibilities that some node in a graph can move to some other node or state. Maybe that actually makes sense to you now. And so what we were creating was that weighted structure of saying, going from this k-mer, how could it be completed into the next k-mer? So that was encoding the probabilities of a state change. And finally, I made this important note that list comprehensions can be made into lazy generators just by replacing the square brackets with parentheses.